The cabin was settling into its pre-flight rhythm, seatbelts snapping, carry-ons shoved into bins, attendants offering polite nods, when the first cry cut through. It was sharp, unrelenting, and came from the lap of Nathaniel Vanderbilt, a man whose name usually commanded boardrooms and newspaper headlines. Today, though, Chicago's billionaire tech CEO was reduced to nothing more than a weary father. 2-year-old Zoe wailed with a force that made even the hum of the engines seem faint. Nathaniel rocked her gently, whispering promises of toys, bottles, anything that might still the storm. She kicked harder, her tiny fists flailing, and the pacifier he'd offered minutes earlier now lay somewhere under the seat. The first sigh came from across the aisle, then a muttered complaint from behind. Soon the stares began, those sharp, silent verdicts that strangers pass when patience runs thin. A woman adjusted her silk scarf with an exaggerated roll of her eyes. A businessman closed his laptop harder than necessary. Even the flight attendant's polite tones strained as she asked if Nathaniel might need assistance. Assistance. As if wealth could fix a child's grief in midair. As if the man who managed billion-dollar mergers could summon control over this small, furious heartbeat pressed against his chest. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. He had stared down investors who threatened lawsuits, negotiated deals that hung by a thread, but this helplessness was foreign. Sweat gathered at his temples, and for once the expensive suit felt more like armor cracking than protection. Zoe screamed louder, her cries bouncing off the cabin walls, drowning in the thick air of judgment and impatience. Nathaniel pressed his forehead briefly against hers, his whisper breaking as if he were bargaining with the universe itself. "Please, Zoe, please stop." But the child did not stop. And the billionaire who once seemed untouchable finally looked like every other father, powerless and afraid. He could face Wall Street titans, but not his own daughter's tears. If this story has you hooked already, take a moment to subscribe to Souls and Riches Stories channel. And in the comments, let us know the country you're watching from. We'd love to see your flag below. Kelly Evans had always preferred the quiet corners of life. A stack of novels, the scent of paper and ink, afternoons spent shelving books in order no one else noticed. Those were the spaces where she felt most herself. On this flight, tucked into a narrow economy seat with a paperback in hand, she wanted nothing more than to disappear into the words. But Zoe's cries kept slicing through the pages. The sound carried through the curtain, persistent and raw, until it drowned out every paragraph Kelly tried to read. She shifted in her seat, pressing her palm over the book as though that would steady her nerves. Other passengers in economy muttered, rolled their eyes, even made comments loud enough to carry. None of them rose. None of them cared to do more than complain. Kelly pressed her lips together. She hated attention. She hated confrontation even more. Yet something about the child's sobs stirred her, as though a string inside her had been plucked. "Why is no one doing anything?" she thought. "Why am I just sitting here?" Her heart pounded at the absurd idea forming in her mind. She shut her book. Her legs felt heavier than stone as she stood. It was the last thing she wanted. Eyes on her, strangers watching, but her body moved forward as though pulled. The curtain separating economy from first class loomed like a barrier between worlds. That thin fabric meant luxury, wealth, and people like Nathaniel Vanderbilt who never had to count pennies. It was not a place where shy librarians wandered. She paused at the edge, taking a breath that trembled. Just ask. If he says no, go back. At least you tried. With that, she slipped through. The scene was worse up close. Nathaniel balanced Zoe awkwardly, his tie loosened, his face drawn with exhaustion. Toys scattered the floor like abandoned negotiations. He was murmuring pleas under his breath, as though words alone could soothe the storm. The sight startled Kelly. This was not the polished CEO splashed across magazines, but a man unraveling. "Excuse me," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Nathaniel didn't look up. He was crouched low, patting the carpet for a lost pacifier. "Sorry to bother you," Kelly tried again, her voice firmer this time. Nathaniel finally glanced up, his expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. He was not used to strangers intruding on his space, especially not someone in worn jeans and a cardigan with fraying cuffs. "I've tried everything," he said quickly. Almost defensive. "She won't stop." Kelly swallowed hard. Sometimes it helps if it isn't the parent. Babies sense the stress." She crouched slightly so she was level with Zoe, who twisted in Nathaniel's arms, her cheeks damp with tears. "Would you mind if I tried singing to her?" Nathaniel blinked, torn between pride and desperation. He hesitated, his grip tightening around Zoe as if to protect her from more disappointment. But Zoe wailed louder, a sharp sound that made even him flinch. Finally, with a weary exhale, he nodded. "All right, if you think you can." Kelly's hands shook, but she didn't reach out right away. She crouched lower, letting Zoe see her face, speaking in a quiet, almost secret tone. "Hi, sweetheart," she whispered. "It's okay, you're safe." Zoe paused, only for a breath, her cries thinning into small hiccups. Kelly began humming an old melody her grandmother once sang when the world felt heavy. It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy, just a simple tune drawn slow and steady. She moved her hand gently in the air above Zoe's head, tracing circles invisible to everyone else. Something shifted. The cries softened into uneven sobs, then into small whimpers. Zoe's fists loosened, her breathing slowed. She blinked up at Kelly with wide, wet eyes and then, astonishingly, rested her head against her shoulder as if the tune had unlocked a secret doorway to calm. The cabin changed with her. The whispers stopped. The tense sighs faded. For the first time in nearly an hour, silence returned to first class. Fragile but whole. Nathaniel stared as though he'd just witnessed a trick beyond reason. He leaned back against the seat, exhaustion etched into his face, but his eyes fixed on Kelly. "What? What did you just do?" Kelly offered a small, self-conscious smile. "Nothing special, just something my grandmother taught me." Nathaniel looked at Zoe sleeping peacefully, then back at Kelly. For a man used to power and solutions, the answer felt humbling. His voice lowered, almost reverent. "You're an angel disguised as a passenger." Kelly didn't answer. She only handed Zoe gently back into his arms, her heart racing, her cheeks warm. Then, without another word, she stepped back toward the curtain, as if retreating to her world before anyone asked who she really was. Behind her, the billionaire still sat speechless, holding his quiet daughter, wondering how a stranger from the back of the plane had succeeded where all his influence had failed. The landing gear hit the runway with a soft jolt, the kind that made passengers stir from half-sleep and clutch their bags a little tighter. In first class, Nathaniel Vanderbilt let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Zoe still slept against his shoulder, small lips parted, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. For the first time in hours, he wasn't battling glares or silent judgment. He was just a father carrying a child. As passengers began gathering their things, Nathaniel caught the eye of a flight attendant. He scribbled a few words quickly on the back of his own stationery card, slipped it into an envelope, and passed it to her discreetly. No flourish, no signature beyond his initials, just a note of gratitude, sealed in quiet sincerity. Kelly Evans, meanwhile, shuffled out of her cramped seat in economy with her book pressed against her chest. She hadn't slept a minute. Her nerves still buzzed from what she'd done, standing, crossing that curtain, singing to a stranger's child, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She replayed the moment in her head, cheeks heating every time she thought of the eyes on her. It was foolish, maybe even reckless. But Zoe had stopped crying, and that was worth the embarrassment. At the door, just as she was preparing to vanish into the anonymity of the crowd, a flight attendant stopped her. "This is for you," the woman said with a small smile, handing over the envelope. Kelly blinked in confusion, hesitating before taking it. She slipped it open and read, "You saved my day. Thank you." Envy, her chest tightened. She glanced back down the jet bridge toward first class, half expecting to see Nathaniel standing there. But the cabin had already emptied. There was no dramatic moment, no lingering eye contact. Just a note, elegant in its simplicity, left like a pressed flower in a book, delicate, fleeting. Kelly tucked the envelope into her bag and shook her head. "That's that," she whispered. Their worlds couldn't be more different. He was Nathaniel Vanderbilt, name etched into skyscrapers and boardroom deals. She was Kelly Evans, part-time librarian's assistant, barely holding on to rent, clinging to interviews that never called back. Whatever kindness had passed between them belonged to the sealed air of that flight, not the streets of Chicago. Still, as she walked through the terminal, she caught herself smiling, a rare, small curve of her lips. For a moment, it felt like she mattered, not as a resume in a stack or as another face in a line, but as someone who could make a difference when everything else failed. Nathaniel, exiting through a private side gate with Zoe in tow, thought of the same moment differently. He held his daughter closer, whispering a promise only she could hear. "We'll be all right, Zoe." Someone reminded me of that. He had no intention of ever seeing the shy stranger again. Their encounter was one of those odd, beautiful fragments of life, here, then gone. And yet, neither of them knew how thin the walls of their separate worlds truly were. Chicago's skyline was vast, its neighborhoods stretched in every direction, but threads had already been pulled between them. The billionaire with his silent burdens and the librarian with her quiet resilience were not finished with each other. Kelly reached the exit doors of the airport and paused, the envelope still tucked in her bag. She pressed her palm against it, as though holding on to proof that she hadn't imagined it. Then she exhaled, stepped into the cool evening air, and disappeared into the crowd. Nathaniel slid into the back seat of a waiting car, his daughter still asleep, unaware of the stranger who had soothed her. The city lights blurred past the tinted glass, reflecting in his eyes that looked as restless as ever. Gratitude was not enough to erase exhaustion, nor was wealth enough to quiet the fear of failing his little girl. For now, though, both walked separate paths, unaware they were destined to cross again. This time, not by chance, but by the kind of collision that rewrites futures. 2 days later, Kelly Evans adjusted her blazer for the third time in 5 minutes. The sleeves still felt too long, the shoulders a little stiff, but it was the best she owned. Today wasn't just another interview. This was her chance. Coordinator of the new children's section at the Lincoln Community Library, a steady paycheck, benefits, and the possibility of finally putting the eviction notice from her landlord out of her mind. She clutched her folder of resumes like a lifeline and whispered, "You've got this, Kelly. Just smile. Just breathe." The lobby buzzed with faint chatter, the polished floors reflecting the early morning light. She turned the corner toward the waiting room and walked straight into a stroller. The impact jolted her backward, scattering papers across the floor like startled birds. Resumes, recommendation letters, even the carefully written cover sheet fluttered down in embarrassing disarray. Kelly gasped, "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." She scrambled to gather the sheets, her face flushing. "No, it was my fault. I wasn't looking where I was going," came a man's voice, deep but familiar. Kelly froze, her hand hovering over a fallen page. She looked up, and her breath caught. Nathaniel Vanderbilt, the man from the plane. The billionaire who'd handed her a sleeping child like a fragile treasure. And beside him, Zoe, now tucked in a stroller, clapped her tiny hands as if this crash were the best show she'd seen all week. "You," Kelly blurted, eyes wide. "You." Nathaniel echoed, pointing at her in equal surprise. For a moment neither spoke. It was absurd, impossible, yet here they were. Kelly snatched up another paper, stuffing it into her folder, her hands trembling. "I didn't think I'd ever— what are you doing here?" Nathaniel straightened his blazer, attempting to recover his usual composure, though the faint carrot-colored stain on his shoulder from Zoe's breakfast betrayed him. "I could ask you the same thing. Don't tell me you're following me." Kelly's mouth dropped open. "Following you? I didn't even know you existed until 2 days ago." She quickly gathered the last resume and stood, brushing at her skirt. "And even if I did, why would I follow a man who brings a stroller to business meetings?" Nathaniel opened his mouth, then closed it, clearly caught off guard. Zoe, sensing the tension, squealed with delight and reached her arms out toward Kelly. Kelly blinked. "Is she?" "She wants you," Nathaniel admitted, almost incredulous. Kelly leaned closer, and Zoe immediately grabbed her finger with a grip stronger than her size suggested. The toddler giggled, patting Kelly's hand as though greeting an old friend. Nathaniel exhaled, part amazement, part resignation. "Unbelievable. You calm her down again, just like that." Kelly gave a nervous laugh, though her cheeks warmed. "It's not me. She just likes people, I guess." At that moment, a brisk voice cut through. "Mr. Vanderbilt, good morning." A woman in a tailored suit stepped into the hall holding a tablet. "We're ready for you in the conference room." She turned her sharp gaze on Kelly, eyes narrowing as they landed on the scattered papers she was still clutching. "And you must be one of the candidates. Miss Evans, correct?" Kelly's stomach dropped. How did she know her name? Nathaniel cleared his throat. "Miss Evans and I already met on a flight." He hesitated, then added, "She's the reason my daughter is calm right now." The woman's expression softened only slightly before turning back to Nathaniel. As you know, sir, your presence as one of the principal donors is essential. The candidates will be brought in shortly. Kelly blinked. Donor? Her heart sank. Nathaniel wasn't just here for some meeting. He was the major investor behind the very program she was interviewing for. The realization hit like a weight. The man who'd witnessed her most awkward, impulsive moment on a plane now had influence over her future. Wait, Kelly said slowly, clutching her folder. You're the investor? Nathaniel allowed himself a faint smile. Guilty. Her cheeks burned. She practically accused him of being ridiculous in the hallway, and now he held the power to shape her career. Zoe tugged at her sleeve again, oblivious to the tension. Kelly glanced at the child, then at Nathaniel, embarrassment twisting in her stomach. She had wanted to walk into this interview confident, prepared, in control. Instead, she was standing in front of the most intimidating resume reader she could imagine, with a billionaire's daughter clinging to her hand like she belonged there. Nathaniel tilted his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. Well, Miss Evans, he said softly enough that only she heard, it seems fate enjoys a sense of humor. Kelly exhaled, half mortified, half entranced. Maybe it did. Kelly sat stiffly in the waiting room, folder clutched in her lap, her nerves already rattled from the unexpected collision in the hallway. She tried to focus on steadying her breath, but the murmur of voices near the conference room shifted. Moments later, Mrs. Patterson, the sharp-eyed woman with the tablet, returned. I'm afraid we'll need to postpone your interview, she announced briskly. There's a maintenance issue in the meeting room, ceiling leak. We'll reschedule you for later this week. Kelly's stomach dropped. Postpone? She forced a polite smile. Of course, thank you. Her chance, already fragile, slipped further out of reach. As she gathered her things to leave, Nathaniel appeared beside her. Zoe perched on his hip, clutching a stuffed rabbit. He offered Kelly an apologetic look. Well, looks like fate isn't done having its fun. Kelly raised an eyebrow, trying to mask her disappointment. Fate needs a new hobby. He chuckled, shifting Zoe. Since we're both suddenly free, how about coffee? Consider it my way of apologizing for nearly mowing you down in the hallway. Kelly hesitated. Every instinct told her to retreat, but Zoe reached out toward her again, tiny hands insistent. Kelly sighed. Fine, but only because your daughter seems to think I'm her entertainment. Nathaniel smiled. Then we'll let her call the shots. The cafe down the street was warm and unpretentious, with scuffed tables and the smell of roasted beans. Hardly the place she expected a billionaire to choose, but Nathaniel slid into a booth with surprising ease, balancing Zoe on his lap. Kelly ordered tea, still unsure why she agreed to this. Nathaniel leaned back, loosening his tie, and for the first time since she'd met him, he looked normal. Less boardroom polish, more exhausted parent. You don't look like the type who frequents coffee shops with sticky floors, Kelly remarked. He smirked. I don't have the luxury of type anymore. These days I go wherever they don't mind if a toddler throws crackers on the floor. Zoe, as if on cue, dropped half a cracker onto the booth seat and giggled. Kelly's lips curved despite herself. Parenthood seems lively. Nathaniel gave a short laugh, then ran a hand through his hair. Lively is one word. Chaotic is another. Her nanny quit last week. I've been managing everything myself. He sighed, his voice lower now, almost confessional. You'd think I could solve it easily. Hire someone new. Swipe a card, sign a check, but he trailed off, his gaze dropping to Zoe's small fingers tugging at his sleeve. It's hard to trust strangers with your child, and Zoe doesn't exactly make it easy. She seems to have very particular preferences. Kelly arched a brow. Like clinging to random librarians on airplanes? Nathaniel looked up, startled, then laughed, genuine and unguarded. Exactly like that. For a moment, Kelly relaxed. The distance between them, the billionaire and the job seeker, felt less sharp. Here was a man admitting without armor that money couldn't solve every problem. So, she said carefully, how's the billionaire balancing act going? Board meetings by day, diaper duty by night? His expression turned wry. Let's just say investors don't care if you're late to a call because someone threw oatmeal on your suit. Kelly chuckled, covering her mouth. I can see why. Nathaniel leaned in slightly. And you? What's your story, Miss Evans? You seem far too patient to just be a candidate for the library. She toyed with the edge of her teacup. Patience isn't a skill, it's survival. I grew up with a grandmother who taught me that sometimes the smallest acts, like singing a lullaby, can change everything. It's not glamorous, but it's what I know. Nathaniel studied her for a beat longer than she was comfortable with. His expression wasn't the polished curiosity of a businessman. It was softer, thoughtful. "Well, Zoe seems to think you're extraordinary." Zoe babbled then, reaching for Kelly's hand with such insistence that Kelly had no choice but to let the toddler grab her finger. The connection sent a pang through her chest, both strange and warm. Kelly shook her head lightly. "She doesn't even know me." "Sometimes kids know better than adults," Nathaniel murmured. For a moment, the noise of the cafe receded, leaving only the three of them in a small, improbable bubble. Nathaniel, the man whose name carried weight in skyscrapers, looked less like a mogul and more like a father hanging on by threads. And Kelly, ordinary, struggling Kelly, suddenly felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. She pulled her hand back gently, clearing her throat. "Well, I should be heading out before your assistant accuses me of distracting you from diaper negotiations." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "Trust me, this was the most peaceful meeting I've had all week." Kelly rose, gathering her things. For the first time in a long time, her heart felt oddly light. Maybe fate did have a sense of humor after all. Kelly trudged up the narrow stairwell of her apartment building, her heels clicking against chipped tiles that hadn't seen fresh paint in years. The encounter at the cafe lingered in her mind. Nathaniel's laugh, Zoe's tiny hand curling around her finger. That strange sense of belonging in a world she knew wasn't hers. For a fleeting afternoon, she'd felt weightless, but reality was waiting at her door. An envelope, stark and white, was taped across the peeling wood with her landlord's scrawl in red ink. "Final notice." Her chest tightened. She already knew what it meant before she tore it open, hands trembling. The words blurred at first. 3 months in arrears, vacate within 15 days, or legal action will be pursued. Kelly pressed her back against the door, sliding down until she sat on the faded welcome mat. 15 days. 2 weeks and a day. That was all the time she had left before everything she owned, 2 suitcases, a thrift store couch, a collection of second-hand books, would be stacked on the curb for anyone to claim. Her throat tightened. She had just calmed the child of one of the wealthiest men in Chicago, and yet she couldn't keep her own roof over her head. The irony cut like glass. Inside, the apartment felt smaller than usual. The refrigerator hummed, half-empty shelves stared back at her. She dropped the envelope on the counter and sank into the sagging couch. Exhaustion settled heavy, the kind that sleep didn't fix. Shame clawed at her. She'd always believed she could make it in the city on her own. A librarian's paycheck wasn't much, but it was supposed to be steady. Then came budget cuts, hours reduced, rejection emails stacking up like unpaid bills. Each month she'd promised herself she'd catch up. Each month the gap widened. Now the gap was a cliff. Kelly buried her face in her hands. How did I end up here? She had done everything right. College degree, hard work, living modestly. Yet she was one notice away from being swallowed by a city that didn't notice her at all. Her phone buzzed on the armrest. For a heartbeat, she thought it might be good news, maybe a call about another interview. But it was just her bank app, a cold reminder of what she already knew. Balance nearly drained, rent impossible, groceries a question mark. 15 days. The number repeated in her mind like the tick of a clock she couldn't stop. Where would she go? Back to Iowa, to the town she'd once sworn she'd outgrow? To her parents' small house where every neighbor whispered about failed dreams? No, she couldn't face that. She stood abruptly, pacing the length of her tiny living room. The walls closed in, lined with book spines she'd rescued from clearance bins. Her safe haven of stories now mocked her with tales of triumph and happy endings she couldn't find for herself. Kelly forced herself to breathe. Tomorrow she would call the landlord, beg for another extension, though she knew his patience was as thin as the walls of this building. Tomorrow she would check job boards again, send more applications into the void. Tonight, she let herself whisper the fear out loud. I'm running out of time. She sank onto the couch again, clutching a pillow to her chest, staring at the ceiling like answers might appear in the cracks. She thought of Zoe's giggle, the way the little girl had chosen her, trusted her. She thought of Nathaniel, stripped of his polished armor, confessing over coffee that money couldn't buy trust. Her world and his had brushed together for an instant, like 2 stars passing in the night. But while his life was built on wealth and marble foyers, hers was collapsing under late fees and final notices. Kelly closed her eyes, exhaustion heavier than the weight of the envelope on the counter. 15 days. The countdown had begun. The next afternoon, Kelly sat at the same corner cafe, clutching a mug of tea, as though warmth could buy her courage. She'd come to clear her head, to steady herself after reading the eviction notice again that morning. But instead of peace, she found Nathaniel Vanderbilt sliding into the seat across from her. Zoe balanced on his knee, a hesitant smile softening his usually confident face. "I asked Mrs. Patterson for your number," he said without preamble. "I hope that's not inappropriate." Kelly blinked. "You what?" "She mentioned you were one of the candidates," he explained, shifting Zoe, who was tugging at his tie, "and I needed to talk to you about something important." Her first instinct was to bristle. Billionaires didn't track down librarians unless they wanted something. Still, she stayed put, curiosity tugging harder than suspicion. "All right, I'm listening." Nathaniel sighed, the kind of sigh that belonged to someone who hadn't slept properly in days. "You saw it on the plane, you saw it again at the library. I'm not doing great at this," he gestured at Zoe, who now held his watch like a toy. "Solo parenting thing. Her nanny quit last week. My schedule is impossible. And she won't let just anyone near her." Kelly lowered her eyes to Zoe, who, as if on cue, stretched her tiny arms toward her. Kelly hesitated, then let the child grip her finger. The trust was instant, unshakable. Zoe cooed happily, settling into her lap as though she belonged there. Nathaniel watched the scene with something between relief and awe. "See, it's effortless for you. With me, it's like negotiating with a hostile board." Kelly let out a nervous laugh, though her chest tightened. "That doesn't mean I'm qualified to be anyone's nanny. I have an interview, a real job coming." "I know," Nathaniel said quickly. "I'm not asking for forever. Just temporary. 2 weeks. Live at my home, help me with Zoe until you start at the library. In return, I'll cover your expenses, and you'll have a roof over your head." Kelly froze. His words cut straight to the secret she hadn't shared with anyone, that her roof was about to vanish in 15 days. She opened her mouth, then shut it, her pride flaring against the undeniable temptation. "You make it sound so simple." "It can be," Nathaniel pressed gently. "You need stability. I need help. And Zoe clearly needs you." Kelly studied him. The man across from her was not the polished CEO she'd glimpsed on magazine covers. He was a father whose daughter preferred strangers to sleep on his shoulder, a man with mashed potato stains on his suit. Vulnerable. Human. But suspicion lingered. "Why me? You could hire someone tomorrow. Someone with actual childcare experience. Someone who doesn't trip over strollers in waiting rooms." He leaned forward, sincerity in his eyes. "Because she trusts you. That's not something I can buy. And because you didn't ask for anything when you helped us. You just acted. Do you know how rare that is in my world?" Kelly's throat tightened. Her instinct screamed to protect herself. Moving into a billionaire's home wasn't just a leap, it was a plunge. Pride told her to walk away, to prove she could survive on her own. But survival whispered louder. Rent was due, eviction was looming, and here was an offer that could buy her time. Zoe babbled then, reaching up to pat Kelly's cheek with a sticky hand. The child's easy affection tore through every argument she'd built. Kelly swallowed hard. 2 weeks, that's all." 2 weeks, Nathaniel agreed, "and I get my own room, my own space." "You'll have your own wing," he said, managing a small grin. "The house is large." Kelly let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Slowly, she extended her hand across the table. Nathaniel took it, his grip firm, steady. The deal was sealed not with contracts or signatures, but with a handshake over lukewarm coffee, a sleeping toddler between them, and 2 lives quietly tilting toward chaos, neither of them could yet imagine. Kelly stood at the base of the driveway, her 2 battered suitcases by her side, staring up at the Vanderbilt estate. It didn't look like a house so much as a museum. Arched windows, stone columns, and a fountain that sprayed in precise arcs across a manicured lawn. The kind of place you'd expect to see in glossy magazines, not somewhere she'd ever imagined living. She shifted uncomfortably, tugging at her cardigan. 2 weeks, she reminded herself. Just 2 weeks. The heavy front door opened before she could ring the bell. Nathaniel appeared, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hair slightly mussed as if Zoe had tugged on it. "Welcome to organized chaos," he said, taking one of her suitcases before she could protest. Kelly stepped inside, her breath catching. The entryway was marble, gleaming so brightly she worried her scuffed shoes might leave marks. A staircase curved upward like something out of a film set. She felt smaller with every step. Zoe toddled in from the living room, squealing when she spotted Kelly. She reached out both arms, wobbling until Nathaniel scooped her up. "See? She's already happier you're here," he said with a relieved smile. Kelly forced a laugh, nerves tugging at her. "I'll believe that after we survive dinner." Surviving dinner turned out to be more complicated than she'd thought. The dining room table could have seated 20, though only 3 places were set. Nathaniel tried to make the evening feel normal, talking about how Zoe had a new favorite food and pouring sparkling water into crystal glasses. But the illusion cracked quickly. It started with mashed potatoes. Zoe, unimpressed with the neat spoonful Nathaniel offered, scooped a handful with her fist and launched it across the table. The potatoes landed squarely on his shirt. Nathaniel groaned, staring at the stains spreading across his tailored button-down. "Really?" Kelly, startled, knocked over her glass in the process of laughing. Water spilled in a neat river across the table, dripping onto the pristine rug below. She scrambled with napkins, cheeks burning. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," Nathaniel cut in, pressing a paper towel against his chest with as much dignity as a man covered in potatoes could manage. He looked at Kelly's horrified expression, then at Zoe clapping delightedly at her handiwork. For the first time in days, he laughed. Deep, unrestrained laughter that filled the cavernous room. Kelly blinked, then laughed too, the sound catching in her throat. The 3 of them sat in chaos. Potatoes on silk, water soaking into the rug, napkins everywhere, and somehow it felt more real than any flawless dinner could. Later, after the mess was cleaned and the house grew quiet, Kelly stood in the softly lit nursery. Zoe was restless, tossing in her crib, her small fists clutching the blanket tight. Nathaniel hovered near the door, his face lined with fatigue. "She won't stay down," he whispered, frustration and worry mixed in his tone. "She cries every time I put her down." Kelly stepped closer, humming under her breath. It was the same lullaby she had sung on the plane. Slowly, Zoe's cries softened into whimpers, then sighs. The toddler reached up, and Kelly gathered her into her arms, rocking gently until the girl's eyelids fluttered shut. Nathaniel didn't move. He stood in the doorway, watching, his chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. The sight hit him harder than any market crash or hostile takeover ever had. His daughter, at peace, resting against someone else's shoulder. Not a nanny, not family, but this quiet woman who had stepped into their lives by accident and somehow filled a void he hadn't known how to name. Kelly eased Zoe back into the crib, careful not to wake her, then pulled the blanket over her small form. She turned and found Nathaniel's gaze on her. "She just needs comfort," Kelly said softly, almost apologetically. "That's all." Nathaniel swallowed, words caught in his throat. "You make it look easy," he managed. "It isn't," Kelly admitted, brushing her palms against her skirt. "But sometimes, love doesn't need to be complicated." For a moment, silence hung between them, thick with something unspoken. Nathaniel's world was skyscrapers and shareholder meetings. Hers was overdue rent and worn paperbacks. Yet here, in the glow of a nursery lamp, those differences felt irrelevant. He nodded slowly, almost reverently. "Thank you." Kelly offered a small smile, then slipped past him toward the guest wing, her footsteps quiet on the polished floor. Nathaniel remained in the doorway, staring at his sleeping daughter, the echo of Kelly's lullaby still in the air. For the first time in weeks, the house didn't feel empty. And as he turned off the nursery light, he realized no amount of money had ever bought him this kind of peace. The days that followed carried a rhythm none of them had expected. What began as an arrangement of convenience, 2 weeks of help, a roof over Kelly's head, started to feel like something more layered. In the mornings, Zoe would bang her spoon against the high chair, demanding mashed bananas, while Kelly tried to coax her into trying oatmeal. Nathaniel, tie half-fastened, would stride in with his laptop under his arm, muttering about meetings, only to stop mid-sentence when Zoe lobbed a piece of toast across the kitchen. Kelly's laughter would fill the room, light and unforced, and Nathaniel would shake his head in mock defeat, secretly relieved that the house finally echoed with sound other than silence. Afternoons became adventures. Nathaniel cleared time in his calendar, a rarity his board would never have believed, and joined Kelly and Zoe at the park. The billionaire who once thought public benches beneath him now found himself chasing Zoe around slides, his designer shoes sinking into sand. Kelly sat on the bench with a book, laughing as Nathaniel pretended to be out of breath after a single climb. "You run companies, but not playgrounds," she teased, her eyes sparkling. He grinned back, panting dramatically. "Playgrounds are tougher. Shareholders don't throw sand in your face." Another afternoon brought them to the library where Kelly had once shelved books. She guided Zoe through the children's section, crouching low to hold picture books while Nathaniel watched, struck by the quiet authority she carried here. This was her world, where words mattered, where small imaginations blossomed. Zoe leaned against Kelly's side, entranced by the story, and Nathaniel realized how rare it was for his daughter to rest so easily with anyone. Evenings stretched into something deeper. After Zoe was tucked into bed, often only by Kelly's lullaby, Nathaniel and Kelly would linger in the kitchen. At first it was small talk, books she loved, the chaos of his meetings. But slowly the edges softened. Nathaniel admitted what he rarely spoke aloud. "I lost her mother 2 years ago, complications after Zoe was born." His voice cracked, a man who had given countless press statements yet struggled with this truth. "I thought money could fix it, hospitals, specialists, whatever it took. But some things can't be bought." Kelly's eyes filled, her voice gentle. "I'm so sorry, that must have felt unbearable." "It still does," he said quietly, staring at the untouched glass of wine on the counter. "I've kept myself busy, deals, expansions, anything not to feel the weight of walking into a quiet house." He met her gaze. "But she changes that." He nodded toward Zoe's room. "And lately, so do you." Kelly swallowed, torn between comfort and caution. She told him truths of her own, the years of feeling invisible, her constant fear that no matter how hard she worked, she would always be replaceable. "That's why the eviction notice cut so deep," she admitted, her voice trembling. "It wasn't just losing an apartment. It felt like proof I didn't belong here. Or anywhere." Nathaniel leaned forward, his tone steady. "You belong. You proved that the first time you crossed a curtain you weren't supposed to." Her chest tightened, his words piercing the layers of doubt she'd carried for years. For the first time, she believed someone might actually mean it. The bond grew in small moments, too. One night, Zoe toddled out of bed clutching her stuffed rabbit, her face crumpled with tears. Kelly scooped her up, whispering the familiar lullaby. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, silent, watching Zoe's body relax against Kelly's shoulder, her sobs dissolving into sighs. Kelly kissed the child's hair softly, and Nathaniel felt something break inside him. Not pain, but release. Later, when Zoe was asleep again, he found himself laughing, truly laughing, as Kelly recounted how Zoe had managed to smear applesauce across the dog walker's suit earlier that day. His laughter wasn't the polite chuckle he used in boardrooms or the forced laugh at investor dinners. It was raw, surprising even to him. Kelly paused mid-story, startled by the sound. "What?" she asked, smiling. Nathaniel shook his head, still laughing. "I just realized I haven't laughed like this in years, not since everything." His eyes softened. "And I didn't think I could again." The admission hung in the air, fragile and profound. Kelly felt her own throat tighten, not with pity, but with something warmer. She didn't reply, just smiled, letting the weight of his words settle between them. Zoe stirred in her sleep down the hall, a soft giggle escaping as if echoing their moment. Kelly looked at Nathaniel, and he looked back, both silently acknowledging the truth neither dared say aloud. It wasn't money or obligation or even circumstance binding them. It was Zoe, her innocence, her laughter, her trust that had stitched their worlds together. And as the night deepened, Nathaniel realized that for the first time since his wife's passing, his house wasn't just filled with noise. It was filled with life. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Kelly stood in the kitchen of the Vanderbilt estate, her hands trembling as she slit open the envelope. She had grown used to rejection emails, form responses that bruised her hope before it even had time to rise. But this time, the words were different. "Congratulations, Miss Evans. We are delighted to offer you the position of Children's Section Coordinator at the Lincoln Community Library." Kelly read the sentence 3 times, her chest rising with something that felt like relief, pride, and fear all tangled together. She had done it. She finally had the job she'd worked toward, the career that felt like more than survival. When Nathaniel returned from a meeting that evening, tie loosened, exhaustion still clinging to him, she shared the news. Zoe toddled around the living room, squealing with delight as though she somehow understood. "That's incredible," Nathaniel said, genuine warmth lighting his features. You deserve it, Kelly. She smiled, though the weight of what came next pressed heavy on her shoulders. The library job meant stability, yes, but it also meant leaving this house, leaving Zoe, leaving the strange, fragile world they had built together. Nathaniel must have sensed her hesitation. He sat down across from her, his expression caught between determination and vulnerability. "There's something I need to ask," he began. Kelly braced herself. "I know this arrangement was temporary, 2 weeks, you said. But these past days, Zoe's been happier than I've seen her in months. She trusts you. And if I'm honest, so do I." He paused, searching for words that didn't sound like a business deal. "I don't just want you in her life for 2 weeks. I want you to stay. Permanently, as part of our family." Kelly's breath caught. The words she had longed to hear, belonging, permanence, now scared her more than the eviction notice ever had. Independence had always been her shield. To lean on someone, especially a man whose world was built on wealth and power, felt dangerous. She looked down at Zoe, who had climbed into her lap, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her small hand wrapped tightly around Kelly's fingers. The child's trust was as simple as it was unshakable. Kelly's heart ached at the thought of walking away. Her voice came out soft, uncertain. "Nathaniel, I don't know if I belong in this life. Your life. You're a billionaire with an empire to run. I'm a librarian who can barely keep her plants alive." Nathaniel leaned forward, his tone steady. "That's exactly why you belong. You're not here because of money or convenience. You're here because when everything fell apart, when Zoe was crying on that plane and I had no idea what to do, you stepped forward. Not for recognition, not for reward. Just out of compassion. That's something I can't buy. Something no empire can replicate." Kelly blinked back tears, her mind warring between pride and longing. She had dreamed of a career where she mattered, where her work shaped lives, but hadn't she already shaped a life here? Every smile Zoe gave her, every laugh Nathaniel allowed himself in her presence, proved that she had done something bigger than she'd ever imagined. The silence stretched until Nathaniel added softly, "Whatever choice you make, know this, you've already changed our lives." Kelly looked at Zoe nestled against her, then at Nathaniel's tired but hopeful face. For once, she didn't think in terms of survival. She thought in terms of love, of trust, of a kind of peace she had never known. The truth was simple. Her unthinkable act hadn't been magic on a plane. It was compassion, quiet and unassuming. And compassion had built a bridge money could never buy. She exhaled, a small smile curving her lips. Maybe I don't have to choose between independence and belonging. Maybe I can have both." Nathaniel's shoulders dropped, relief flickering across his face. Zoe clapped as if she understood the decision had been made. And in that moment, Kelly realized wealth couldn't solve panic or silence grief. But human connection could. Money can buy luxury, but not peace. And sometimes, the shyest soul in the room carries the answer no billionaire could afford. What would you have done if you were Kelly Evans? Share your thoughts in the comments, where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to Souls and Riches Stories channel.